Hi, I'm Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to take this snare and turn it into this snare. Whee! So this is Harmor Resampling. I am Harmor Resampling this snare to make this happen, and I am really very surprised that it took me this long to go this hard on this, because this is actually pretty ridiculous. We're gonna, like, I'm gonna show you everything about this, because it's really just, like, the coolest thing for me right now. The three things that matter the most. So there's the harmonic prism. This is that which is creating like the principal change in the sound. Because basically, like if you think about an EQ, EQing like where frequencies are going on, whatever. This basically moves the frequencies themselves. And normally I stay away from doing this kind of thing unless I want a particular kind of spectral destruction. But because a snare is not a tonal event, moving the harmonics around isn't necessarily detrimental to the rest of the sound, which tends to happen in harmonic instances, where you change the phase of it a little bit, even in just an isolated area. It has a cascading phase cancellation effect across it. But if something's largely noise, it's not going to be affected by it. So that means that we're able to just move around sections of harmonics basically with no damage to the original resampling. I'll show you how to do that in a second. The other thing that we're doing is the pluck. The pluck in Harmor, the way this works is that it comes up with a shape. By default, the shape looks like this. And what this means is this is how long these area of harmonics will take to dissipate. So this means that the last one will take the longest to go away, and the highest ones will go away the fastest. And that creates a kind of cascaded filtered pluck. You can change that, and that value situation will be present the way that you make it set. So this is saying that like I'm very carefully tailoring how long certain harmonics are allowed to be around. And this was interesting because I went a certain way to make the sound a certain way before I added reverb and compression and kind of thing. But these choices that are final, that are here now, were made with the processing on, and it was one of the more amazing like sound designing experiences for me, because I know I harp on linear phase all the time, but the idea that the position of the harmonics, the duration of the harmonics, and then also the level of the harmonics themselves as well. Like I am EQing it, but I'm using it with the additive processing of Harmor. That's the third thing. Um, I'm able to do all of these things basically phase damage free onto something like a snare, which benefits unbelievably from having its stuff like not be screwed up in certain ways. I had been experimenting with doing a bunch of like unison and stuff like that, and it's a bit too much at the moment. Like the most amazingness I'm getting out of it is just keeping it in one voice and processing it like that, and then processing it like an actual snare. The way that sounds without reverb is how it sounds. Here's how it sounds without compression. So like that's the main difference there, and that sounds like I'm mostly just like pitching it up, right? But that's not what's happening. There's a lot going on. Here's what it sounds like without the pluck. And here's what it sounds like without the prism. So I was able to move this section of harmonics around the way I wanted to while keeping the root harmonic where it was, and also move around this guy like only a little bit, not as much as these guys, and mostly not touch the higher stuff, which was already more or less fine. This kind of like surgical change to a sound like this is ridiculous. I guess I also did pitch it up. I have a pitch up over here too, and that's how this whole business functions. So to get this going from scratch, because I know that'll be a thing people want to know, you get yourself a Harmor, go to your image business, and there are some advanced stuff you want to take advantage of first, which is you want your ramping to be pretty much solidly nothing. There are advantages to having a certain amount of ramping, especially with post compression. And compression actually does some fun things with a not solid attack. It makes it solid, it makes it snap, but it makes it snap in a certain way that is interesting, if it will do that or not. If not, no ramping is pretty good. Also, the grain is usually set to this, and what this means is essentially the resolution of whatever kind of enveloping you might set up. There was like really specific shapes of things that are happening in here that were experiments based on Like the timbre, for example. Like the solid square version doesn't just turn into like a square version of it because the way the harmonics are moving around are not in any way harmonic. So it just kind of sounds a little bit thinner, but in a coolish way because some of the harmonics that were like present in the middle of these guys didn't sound super great in my opinion. So we get a little bit extra ring, less little thin, and I'm just doing it in there. But these really smooth curves look a certain way, but are a bit deceptive when it comes to how they're actually processed. Really sharp ones then that require really high resolution curves tend to actually be represented as something a little sharper in a way that actually actuates, and this is what governs how actuable it can be, all the way down to half a millisecond long. So which is to say that like whatever half a millisecond is in here is actually the resolution of this curve, which is still pretty good. And that's something you want, and it also applies to how the additive like restoration moves around because that's still harmonic motion too. You also want to pay attention to the sharpness knob. Sometimes, this was the fourth one in an attempt to even get something that sounds like this good, and I've noticed that some versions of it do sound better with the sharpness all the way down, which sort of makes it like it makes it feel a little bit synthier, especially when you use some of the other effects like the phaser. The phaser is practically useless for me personally because and doing with a percussive element here because the harmonic mode is all about what change in pitch, and this is all change in pitch. So the shape of the phaser is very difficult, and it doesn't tend to sound as good. And that's just true for mostly everything, as I've discovered, unless I'm not just doing it right, which is perfectly possible. I haven't figured out everything about the Harmor yet. Anyway, so the magic of the prism is also specific. Let's put this guy in here. Yeah. All right. You do also want to have high precision engaged. It just sounds better, always. Yeah. So the prism is what happens here. What it does by default is a bunch of weirdness because the graph that we're going to, which is right here, is already set to do a thing, but we don't want that. We want it to go away. We want to do this. So this does fun stuff. So this graph represents change in pitch per harmonic, up and down. It's unique in this regard because there is the harmonic unison window, which is pretty similar. It lets you change the pitch of unison, but all the way down is no unison, and all the way up is more unison, and in the center is whatever this is set to. And that's not, so it's not plus and then minus, it's just plus and less plus, which is different than what the prism can do, which is plus and minus. However, we are just going all the way up of this, but it's doing so evenly, which gets us in the multiplier mode a kind of, what's the term? Frequency shifting effect. Yeah, let's open that up a bit. So with this in mind, we're that's what happens when you go all the way up like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to use it as a kind of a guide to change the tones of things, like where things are up and down. So normally when you're playing a note, and like this graph represents a note-based approach to harmonics. So like we're playing C5 right now. So this is C5, and then this is C6, and then harmonics in between, and C7, and like octaves all the way up to like the harmonics that make the sound originally. But the resynthesis is just using that as like a sort of a location. So now we're actually going to kind of have to use it in like the Hertz sense, but still with this interface. And it's a little bit weird. So basically you have to identify which bits we want to move around, and no easier way really than just to do it. And turn all the way up. There we go. All right, so here's an example of kind of, we can make only part of it do that. We have not touched at all anything that's going on up top here. And not only that, but it doesn't interfere with the phase relationship that it has, which would happen constantly if you try to do any of this with EQing and layering and splitting and splicing and that kind of thing, even with linear phase filters. Anyway, that's just to describe the way. Step one is to make a change in the spectral location of individual harmonics. And then the next step is to mess with the pluck. Here's what I was talking about how what it does by default is a kind of cascading filter thing, just based on this. And if you make it all the same time, it just turns into just a static, like kind of a straight volume cut. So now our thought here is to, much like we were doing with the other window, to choose like which harmonics you want to have on for only how much time. So like for example, if I did this, you see it still plays those harmonics, but they shut up instantaneously. And here's some only coming out a little bit because it's only out a little bit. That's how this graph works. Lots of trial and error to kind of identify which harmonics sound good and which harmonics sound good but not as long as they're there. This particular sound has a pretty long tail when it comes to harmonic activity, and that was extremely helpful when it came to actually utilizing it, because it meant that there was still plenty there to kind of mess with. The pluck window on this one was pretty big, like and as you saw, the shape was also fairly specific, and there was a lot of it, which is what trial and error got me, was this. Same thing with the prism. And also another sort of pretty epic benefit of doing it like this is that if I play it live, because I haven't actually made this into a sample yet, it's still just doing this. But if I play it live, you could automate some stuff, like the prism. And even the pluck too. I'm not playing the right guy, am I? I am playing the right guy. That's right, 'cause I'm not compressing it and all that fun stuff. Anyway, the additive control over the pitch and the volume like that is something that is unique entirely to this. And that lets you something about the control that you also don't get when you do things with samples and also minimum phase processing, which is that you still have your impact. I didn't layer anything on this when I put it into the rest of the stack here. Like this, that snap is present because that's how snappy the whole thing was from the beginning, and it stayed that way because I did not change anything about when the phase started, and it didn't either. I'm also let's talk a little bit about the image resampling a bit here. This whole menu. Drag and drop in, here it is, and here it comes, and you have it all on the highest settings and whatever, and you just have it on precisions and the qualities and good stuff, but it really only sounds this good at like the close to the center original pitch. We're screwing with it pretty good with messing around with the prism and stuff like that, but like a big reason why this still has snap is because a big portion of it was left unmolested. And that was what was able to still preserve like there being that snap, because you can still screw with it so far as to like kind of ruin it, but a benefit of this being done this way is that you can, like with the trial and error, you can nudge it around until it gets into a position where everything lines up the way it's supposed to. Much like you would with regular equalizers and stuff when you're doing that kind of thing in post. Like you're just kind of scanning around for when things are supposed to sound right. It's just that now we can experiment with things in ways that don't damage everything else just for having done so. Fun stuff that is. Anyway, let's talk about the actual post-processing. The reverb that's happening here. Reverb 2, I have the mod all the way up like this. So this is the range of modulation, and then the speed is controlled here. This is because I wasn't trying to get more. I wasn't trying to get more harmonic activity. I was trying to get air, but I needed a little bit of harmonic activity, which is why we still hear some. But I'm high passing largely that lower area there, and like I just screw it around until it sounded okay. Low cut it up here. When I'm doing high frequency kind of washy stuff, you want to mess around with the dampening. By default, it's on pretty low, but opening it up is a good technique for air and filliness. Am I even doing anything in here? Nope. This was just there to be in the way, I guess. Don't even need you. It's gonna sound weird now, isn't it? Nah, still fine. Good. Anyway, in the compression. So I'm taking advantage of a weirdness of Maximus's sort of transfer graph here, which is if you do this like big expansion thing here where it'll pull up on stuff as it comes up and down with a whole bunch of attack, the attack will actually do what the attack knob sort of feels like it should do, and it'll snap the hell up a lot. You can see it happening. Doop doop. Here's the input. There's the output. You see how much snappier that is? That's because of the attack time. And I honestly, I'm still not 100% sure on the exact balance of math that makes that the thing that's happening, but that is the result, and that is how you do it. And it's important because I'm doing that on most of these things. By most, I mean all of them. And I'm like traditionally you get that by doing regular compression shapes where you just kind of have your regular threshold and your regular ratio or limit, and then you have an attack on that, which will let some through a certain amount, and that's how that works. Which this still can do, but when you have it set, when you have the attack set off, it just the balance of results is interesting, is all. I'm sure there's a perfectly like reasonable explanation for that, especially with the shapes. But point is, that stuff happens. And then up on the front here, I'm letting out on through 0 dB here some of the top end, and it's because I'm crushing it with the soft saturator. Yep. And then that's mostly just it, really. Barely anything of the actual tone is going above 0 dB. But I'm just kind of cranking it. I cranked it past. So like I have when you push the ceiling past into this, it's a bit interesting because the compression is before the soft saturator, but the post is also before the soft saturator. The soft saturator is the last thing in the chain. And it's interesting so that for this perspective, because it means you could push a compressed normal signal without having to let anything through, and then you could push that higher past the limit that you set for it, kind of like magnifying it through into the limit, the saturating limit, which is sort of I mean exactly what I'm doing here, and that it gives a combination of like a bunch of compression that's also pretty quick and speedy, to I guess just in the mids, but and that distortion up there is to kind of bring back some of the higher frequency stuff that is a little bit lost when we do stuff inside Harmor because of where it decides to cut off stuff up there. But also a benefit of having a low granularity and a low ramp time is that the act of some frequencies moving around in certain ways will create harmonic high frequency noise, and definitely this is, and of course a reverb's helping out with that too, layering it together to make it sound a little more fuller up there. Anyway, this has been the snare from that snare. I love it. I'm going to do this a lot more. This preset, I guess I'll put a zip up for this one because this is actually in a pack inside FL Studio that I didn't even know was there until I updated FL. So not everyone probably has that yet, or maybe they do. I don't know. I'm behind on times. Point is, I will make a zip so that this is a thing people have. Yes. If you have any questions about this, please let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And as usual, have a nice day.